During the era of formidable steam locomotives, American railways confronted a stark reality. The Model T was usurping their passenger base. By the 1920s, branch lines were in decline. Five-member steam crews wasted funds on empty carriages, and the industry's future appeared bleak. The solution, though unglamorous, was a sputtering, gasoline-powered anomaly known as the doodlebug, often ridiculed for its appearance, emissions, and inherent dangers. Yet, when financial insolvency threatened track removal, this ungainly, deliberate, and malodorous contraption accomplished what grander legends could not. It preserved connectivity for remote communities and maintained essential services during crises. How did this wheeled inferno become the improbable savior of America's rail arteries? And what sacrifices were made for its survival? By the early 1920s, the railway sector was hemorrhaging money from myriad sources. While every small rural town still had a station, the crowds that once flocked to them had vanished. Instead of bustling platforms, one might encounter a solitary farmer or two, perhaps a traveling salesperson, amidst numerous deserted benches. The culprit was parked conspicuously nearby, the gleaming black, dust-covered Ford Model T. By 1923, Henry Ford's assembly line churned out over 2 million of these vehicles annually. Suddenly, families who once relied on trains could now simply board their own car and drive directly to town, church, or the nearest county fair. The tracks that had previously united rural America began to feel like obsolete remnants. The financial records of the railroads shifted from profitable to deficit. Passenger train miles plummeted from 27 billion in 1920 to 20 billion by the decade's end. On branch lines, the shorter extensions reaching into agricultural areas, ridership collapsed. While main lines connecting major cities remained profitable, these smaller offshoots told a different tale. Railroads continued operating them out of tradition, or perhaps optimism, but each mile cost more than it generated. Operating a steam train was expensive, requiring a 5-person crew, an engineer for propulsion, a fireman for stoking coal, a conductor for ticketing, a brakeman for safety, and a flagman for rear observation, just to move a few cars. This crew consumed vast quantities of coal and water, regardless of whether the cars were full or empty. Occasionally, a conductor might punch only 3 tickets on a train designed for 100 passengers. The remaining seats were virtually unoccupied. Railroad executives began to panic. Every branch line journey resulted in further financial losses. It could cost up to $125 per mile to operate a steam train, and the revenue from a handful of passengers barely made a dent. Accountants observed the accumulating deficits and marked towns on maps, each circled location signifying a line destined for closure, tracks to be removed, stations to be boarded up, and small towns left isolated. The Model T didn't just siphon off passengers, it undermined the entire branch line infrastructure. Veteran depot staff could foresee the inevitable: empty waiting rooms, weeds sprouting between the tracks, and the gradual demise of local train services. Without intervention, branch lines would disappear one by one, leaving only the distant memory of a train whistle. Someone in a back office must have entertained a radical notion. If a gasoline engine could power a boat, why not a rail car? Thus, the initial gas-electric contraptions emerged. They repurposed standard baggage cars, carving out a forward section to install a gasoline engine, as bulky as a horse trough. This engine was positioned directly inside the car, just behind a slender partition, not beneath the floor or externally. Each startup by the engineer caused the entire car to shiver violently, like a washing machine with a brick inside. This wasn't merely a car engine. Companies such as Electromotive Corporation, EMC, in Cleveland, engineered these with substantial, heavy-duty Winton gasoline engines. Some early versions boasted 275 horsepower, significant for the period, but diminutive compared to a steam locomotive. The engine didn't directly propel the wheels. Instead, it drove a generator, which then supplied electrical power to motors mounted on the axles. In essence, the gas engine produced electricity, and that electricity turned the wheels. This principle, if familiar, mirrors the fundamental design of a contemporary hybrid vehicle, though with considerably more noise and exhaust. Maintaining engine temperature was a different challenge. Rather than concealing the radiator up front, as in a car, it was conspicuously placed on the roof. Large metal conduits meandered from the engine compartment and stretched across the car's top, resembling haphazard plumbing. On sweltering days, steam and heat visibly shimmered from these pipes as the engine roared below. This rooftop radiator became the Doodlebug's distinguishing feature, undeniably unsightly but effective. If one spotted it idly parked on a siding, the prominent humming and dripping of that awkward radiator, like a perspiring mule after an arduous climb, would be the first thing noticed. The remainder of the car was a patchwork of whatever the railroad had at hand. Old coach seating, a baggage area, perhaps a space for mail. The paint was typically a subdued green or brown, as if to apologize for its overall design. However, its true marvel lay beneath its skin. A two-person crew, negating the need for a fireman, and just enough power to transport a modest number of passengers and a few mail sacks. It was the sort of machine that mechanics might shake their heads at, yet also take pride in. There's a tale of an Iowa shop crew who mended a leaking radiator with a length of garden hose and a wad of chewing gum. They weren't obliged to admire the machine, only to keep it operational. The Doodlebug wasn't conceived for speed or elegance. It was designed to extract every last cent from a failing branch line. And for all its peculiarities, it performed that task more effectively than any other rail vehicle of its time. Its gas-electric drivetrain was peculiar, noisy, and somewhat perilous, but it was the sole option left when funds were depleted. Nobody ever regarded a Doodlebug with pride. Crews bestowed upon it every conceivable moniker. The skunk, the huddlebug, the potato bug, the puddle jumper. The most prevalent was Doodlebug, because it crawled along the rails like a disoriented insect, wobbling from one stop to the next. Working the branch lines, one quickly learned that dignity was not part of the job. The old steam engines, requiring 5 men, instilled a sense of grandeur. The Doodlebug, however, needed only 2. An engineer up front and a conductor in the back. No fireman, no brakeman, no flagman. Unions detested it. The Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen and Enginemen labeled it a job killer. Veteran depot workers quipped that the Doodlebug was the only train capable of running out of gas and friends within the same mile. The journey itself was an ordeal for both patience and stomach. With the engine directly behind a thin partition in the baggage compartment, the entire car vibrated like a box of loose tools whenever it started. Floorboards quaked, wicker seats creaked, and windows rattled. Forget the gentle chuff of steam. This was the roar of a truck engine echoing through a wooden corridor. Those seated near the front received an added bonus, the pervasive smell of gasoline. Some days, the scent was so potent one might imagine riding inside a mechanic's garage. Passengers often held handkerchiefs over their noses, and the conductor kept a bottle of smelling salts ready for those who turned green. The Doodlebug's horn offered little assistance either. Steam engines could scare a herd of cattle into the next county, but the Doodlebug's whistle sounded like a sickly goose. More than once, a cow would wander onto the tracks, confront the approaching rail car, and stubbornly refuse to move. There's a story from the Rock Island line about a Doodlebug losing a confrontation with a persistent Holstein. The cow walked away, while the Doodlebug required a new radiator. Even its paint seemed self-conscious, usually a dull green or brown that camouflaged it with the weeds. The radiator pipes on the roof resembled a plumber's nightmare. Children waved as it passed, not out of admiration, but because it was the only train they'd ever see that looked as if it might disintegrate before reaching the next station. Within the railroad community, jokes abounded. "If you can't find the doodlebug, just follow your nose," the station agent would quip. "If it's on time, it probably ran out of gas." Mechanics kept a running tally of which would endure longer, the chewing gum patching the radiator or the crew's patience. Yet, despite all the grievances, the doodlebug persisted. It wasn't about pride or comfort. It was about preserving the rail line. No matter how many jokes circulated in the break room, the ledger books from 1929 reveal a story that is impossible to disregard. The figures are brutal. Profits plummeted, and every branch line began to bleed cash. On one side of the ledger were the old steam runs, 5 men on the payroll, tons of coal shoveled into the firebox, and water stops every few miles. The cost could reach up to $1 per mile, sometimes more. If only 3 or 4 people bought tickets, every trip plunged deeply into the red. Multiply that by hundreds of empty miles, and the railroad's bank account resembled a drought-stricken riverbed. Then, turning the page, one encountered the doodlebug's figures. 2 men instead of 5. No fireman, no coal. Just a tank of gasoline and a prayer. The radiator patch held. The cost dropped to 30 cents per mile, less than a third of the old steam engines. This wasn't merely a saving. It represented the difference between a branch line surviving another year or being torn up for scrap. When the Great Depression struck and every penny mattered, those 30 cents per mile kept small-town America connected. However, the true lifeline wasn't the passengers. It was the U.S. mail. Every sack of letters and parcels delivered by rail came with a government contract, providing a steady stream of income when ticket sales dwindled. Some days, the doodlebug might transport more mail bags than people. The earnings from mail transportation funded wages, fuel, and merely enough to sustain operations. Losing this contract would spell the end of the line. Communities deprived of their rail service found themselves disconnected from the external world. For numerous locations, the doodlebug served as the sole defense against isolation. This rigorous economy came with inherent risks. Gasoline, while more affordable than coal, posed a significantly greater hazard. These vehicles carried over 100 gallons of fuel, sloshing beneath wooden floorboards. Should a doodlebug derail or collide with a truck at a crossing, the outcome could be a conflagration far more intense than any steam engine fire. Newspapers frequently reported on gas-electric crashes escalating into infernos, and veterans shared stories of narrow escapes. Every engineer understood the danger. Nevertheless, when faced with the choice between risking a rolling fire trap or witnessing the dismantling of the tracks, most opted for the doodlebug. Financial realities superseded sentiment or nostalgia. 30 cents per mile, a consistent mail agreement, and a machine so unappealing it would make a brass monkey blush. These were the elements that sustained the branch lines. It wasn't aesthetically pleasing, but it was preferable to watching one's town disappear from the timetable. Electromotive Corporation, EMC, originated as a modest enterprise in Cleveland, Ohio in 1922. Hal Hamilton and his engineering team weren't aiming to construct the next groundbreaking locomotive. Their objective was to assist railroads in stemming their losses. Their gas-electric cars, despite their unpretentious appearance, proved effective. EMC sold dozens of these boxy, radiator-topped doodlebugs to railroads desperate to preserve their branch lines. The company's true innovation lay not just in fabricating inelegant railcars, but in demonstrating that gasoline and electricity could propel trains more economically than coal and steam ever could. Each mile a doodlebug traveled eroded the long-held belief that only a steam engine could dominate the railways. The data unequivocally supported this. Railroads that acquired EMC machines reduced their operational expenditures to 1/3 of what they paid for steam power. The accumulating savings and widespread positive reports quickly gained traction. By the late 1920s, EMC's order books were filled with requests for gas electrics from across the nation. The company began collaborating with prominent firms like Pullman and Brill to construct the car bodies, with EMC providing the essential components: the engine, generator, and electric motors. Then came a pivotal transformation. In 1930, General Motors recognized the impending shift and acquired Electromotive Corporation. Under General Motors, EMC continued to refine its technology, substituting gasoline engines with diesels, enhancing power output, and smoothing out rough edges. EMC evolved into EMD, the Electromotive Division. Those initial doodlebugs ultimately served as the proving ground for a revolution. Their use of gasoline presented a significant peril. A wooden chassis carrying substantial quantities of fuel could transform a collision into a fireball, a risk that disquieted both crew and passengers. Yet, the doodlebug undeniably demonstrated its capacity to sustain branch lines when steam proved too expensive. Without these unassuming little gas electrics, there would be no diesel streamliner, no Zephyr, no future for the railroad. The doodlebug never achieved heroic status, but it harbored the crucial secret that would define the subsequent era of American trains. In 1934, a train named the Pioneer Zephyr fundamentally altered perceptions. Crafted from lustrous stainless steel and resembling something from a science fiction periodical, it bore no resemblance to the boxy doodlebugs that had rumbled along overgrown branch lines. However, beneath its sleek exterior, the Zephyr possessed the same genetic makeup: a lightweight frame, a self-contained power unit, and the promise of enduring through heightened efficiency. The Zephyr was more than just a train. It was a phenomenon. On May 26th, it departed Denver at sunrise and journeyed non-stop to Chicago, covering 1,015 miles in just over 13 hours. Its average speed was an astonishing 77 miles per hour. For a country accustomed to leisurely, smoky journeys, this feat felt akin to a lunar landing. Crowds lined the tracks. Newspapers dubbed it the Silver Streak. Ralph Budd, the president of the Burlington route, stood on the platform and declared, "This is the future of railroading." However, seasoned observers understood the underlying truth. The Zephyr was the elegant offspring of a rather unrefined parent. Without years of improvisational repairs on doodlebugs, without the lessons gleaned from every leaking radiator and every rattling seat, no one would have dared to construct a train from lightweight metal and propel it 1,000 miles in a single day. By the 1950s and 1960s, the original doodlebugs were being phased out, sold off, or left to disintegrate alongside abandoned tracks. The world had progressed, yet every time a streamliner sped past, one could still perceive the legacy of the ungainly little machine that, against all odds, kept the railroad viable long enough to envision new possibilities. Today, as rural communities strive to maintain their last links to the outside world, the lesson is unequivocal. Survival seldom appears glamorous. The doodlebug demonstrated that practical solutions can outlast aesthetically pleasing failures because it prioritized utility over pride and ensured communities remained connected. In a world relentlessly pursuing sleek innovations, sometimes the unconventional lifeboat is what keeps us afloat. What would you compromise to keep your world functioning? Share your thoughts in the comments.